Hi, friends. Welcome back to today's episode of the Life with Loverly podcast.
I am so excited about today's episode that we're about to get
Gosh,
into.
I know we actually have our first guest of this season
So exciting.
on the show today, and it's going to be such a good one. We are having Mary Flo Ridley and Megan Michelson of the brand Birds and Bees.
We were first brainstorming about this, and this was all of the ideas that we came up with for season 5 were so good, but this was one of the very first ones that we thought of
Mhm.
because it was at the very forefront of our minds. You had talked about somebody bringing this up during small group.
Yeah, I was in a small group with some of my girlfriends, and they like 2 of the girls in the group have daughters who are like 10, 11, and then a majority of our kids are like under 5. And so like having like sex talks and just like answering questions has like kind of like we're just in that season or about to get into that season. And one of them was telling me how they had found this Instagram account called The Birds and the Bees,
Mhm.
and it was like just gives you facts and like easy way to have these conversations and ways to like make it not awkward.
Right.
So I brought it back to Michelle. I was like, "Look at this Instagram account. I know you've got like a, 18 and 12-year-old, but like there's still questions being
A
asked."
1000%. That's why I was so excited about this
Yeah.
episode. I might be on the tail end, but it's still gonna be so beneficial to not only me, but I think of all of you guys that have small little ones or going to have little ones in the future. This is gonna be so beneficial for you guys.
Yeah, it definitely makes things a lot less awkward if you have the right resources and tools. And I will tell you, I learned so much in this interview. The Birds and the Bees exist to equip and empower parents to have healthy and age appropriate conversations with their kids. The founder, Mary Flo Ridley, has been passionately sharing this message all over the world for the last 30 years. And then Megan Michelson joined Mary Flo at Birds and Bees 8 years ago to help bring this message to a new generation of parents, which is where I feel like I fall in.
That is amazing. So we're gonna be asking them all the questions today, and we're gonna be diving into how to have the body parts talk with your kids. When is the right time to bring up the sex conversation, especially if your kids aren't asking any questions yet? And specific words and phrases that you have in your toolbox that are planned for those spontaneous conversations that might pop up.
They also offered us a 20% off code on their course, which I think is really awesome because they do a deep dive and really go into detail. And it's just like a further resource on the topic. So if you guys would like to try it out, they gave us a code Loverly20 for 20% at checkout.
Do you remember your conversation with your parents about the birds and the bees?
Yes.
Yeah.
My mom had like a book. It was like there was like one for girls and one for boys, and like it was called, I think, Almost 12. Like that was the
Oh.
book title. And she like sat down and we like read it, and it was kind of like gave I would just say it was probably sort of like this, just like in like book form. And I remember being like, this is so awkward. Like I'm not like I what? And yeah, it's so funny. I remember, like, the first time my mom found, like, my birth control
Yeah.
in my purse, like,
Yeah.
when I was in college, and she was like, "What is this?" She she got me in the car, and she was like, I found some birth control pills in your purse," because I was out with some friends and she saw I had left my purse, so she, like, opened it up thinking I left my wallet,
Oh,
but I
yeah.
had taken a different purse.
That's what she told you anyway.
Exactly. I wasn't there, and so then she sees the birth control, so then because I feel like, you know, the classic awkward conversation happens when you get, like, locked in the car with your
Oh,
mom,
mine happened that way
and
too.
she's like, are you sexually active?" And I was like, "I'm gonna die."
Oh my gosh, I don't remember the birds and the bees conversation, and it Mom, I know it probably happened, I just don't remember it
Yeah.
at all. I remember more of my neighbors telling me all the awful things. I was like, "What? How do you know this
That
stuff?
goes where?
Where?" And then, I do remember when I was older, like, obviously, I was older, I think I was 17, 18.
Yeah.
We're in the car, and she's like she pulls over into a parking lot and puts it in park. She's like, "Are you having sex?" Like, starts crying.
Literally, my mom cried too. I was like, "I
I love
don't
you,
think
mom.
it's, like, that bad."
She's gonna
You
die.
know?
I'll get a phone call about this.
Yeah.
So
Same. Also, yeah,
anyway, but yeah,
lots of
they can
things.
be super awkward, I think is what we're getting at.
Yes.
So
This conversation will equip you on how to not have awkward conversations. And I think even since talking with them, I've even started, like, opening up
Mhm.
conversation with my 4 and 2-year-old, like, that is age appropriate for them to just
Right.
discuss, like, what your body parts are, and, like, it's just I feel like I want my kids to hear this coming from me,
Yes.
and so I have to be the one that's proactive about this. But let's dive in. You guys are gonna love this conversation. So here we are with Mary Flo and Megan from Birds and Bees. Hi, Mary Flo and Megan. I'm so excited to have you guys on today's episode of Life with Loverly. How are y'all?
We're
We're
good.
good. We're happy to be here.
Yes, thanks for having
This
us.
episode is going to be so amazing. I actually came across your Instagram account. I was talking with a few of my girlfriends in our small group, and one of them has kids that are like 6 and 10. And so she's kind of in those years where she's starting to have those conversations with some of her kids. And she asked us, like, have you guys ever heard of this account, Birds and Bees? They help you talk about sex with your kids and private parts and what that means. And so all the other moms have younger kids. And we were like, what is this account? We need to like know all the things too. So that's how I started following you. And I'm so glad that we've connected and that you guys can join us on the podcast because I know you've got lots of awesome information that you're going to be sharing with us today.
Well, that's great.
I know we're really excited. Honestly, I'm a big fan. And so when you started following us, I was minor freak out. I'm like, oh my gosh,
Look
Loverly.
who's here.
That's
So
so
we're really
funny.
excited to be here. Thank you for having
Of
us. This will be fun.
course. So, how did you two meet?
Well, we have known each other a long, long time. Megan is a good friend of my daughter. So we probably in the late elementary, but
Mhm.
even maybe before that, Megan's mom is a good friend of mine. So we've known each other a long time. But just kind of like, your friends' moms.
Yeah.
That's not knowing them super well, but they're in your world. So that's how we met. But I was giving a class. I've been teaching this class for a while. And Megan was
30
teaching.
years. Wild.
Yes. Yeah. For a while.
Yeah. So, you know.
90 years. And so this is just something that I have presented to parents for a long time. But I presented at a school where Megan was a middle school teacher. And so when she saw that I was going to speak at the school, she was a little bit like, "Mrs. Ridley, you do this?"
I had no idea. So I thought it was like this sweet
I
mom. I was like, who made beautiful cakes. That was really what
that
I knew her for.
I was known for the cakes, but
Yes.
she didn't know that I was this.
Secret life.
Yeah. And so I said, "Well, I really don't tell everybody, all my kids' friends." And so anyway, she was shocked, but really took it to heart. And so she really thought, gosh, if all parents could know this, if kids could grow up with this understanding and with relationships with their parents on this topic, it would change my kids' lives at middle school and it
Mhm.
might change marriages. It might change a lot of things. So she kept being interested in this topic. And then,
So I would say that was like the beginning of, you we're both Christians, and so that's part of our story. And I think for me, that was like the beginning of God putting this message on my heart. Think, wow, every parent needs to hear this, and I didn't know that would lead to this interesting career, but here we
Yeah.
are. And so I was hearing it all through the lens of a middle school teacher. Just my kids, my students were living in a very sexualized world, and I was just so taken aback by that. And then a few years later, had children of my own, and then heard her speak again through our church, and again just felt this like everybody's got to hear this message. And so through a turn of events, her daughter was in
mhm,
town, and we were catching up, and she said something like, "My mom's, kind of looking for someone to join her and take over, and I don't want to do this, and neither does my sister." And which I understand.
yeah,
And I said I might want to, and so that led to the beginning of lots of conversations between the two of us to partner together, and it's been such an honor to join Mary Flo and to bring this to a new generation and navigating the digital world and Instagram and really just kind of sharing this message to a larger audience. So that's been really fun for us to take this time tested curriculum that Mary Flo's been teaching for a very long time and to have it reach a whole new generation and to have it really welcomed by a whole new generation.
That's right.
Yeah. And I absolutely can see where, like, as you are a teacher and your background, like, how you spent years in the classroom, like, seeing what these kids are going through and realizing, like, they haven't had this information shared with them. So it makes a lot of sense, like, on that side, like, why this would
Mhm.
interest you.
It was very interesting. I mean, I did not seek out to be in the sex education world as a career,
Nor did
but
I,
yeah,
but
here we are. Um, and it's really been fun. It has kind of led to an extension from education, and um, we both just feel very passionate about empowering parents.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, we're not teaching kids; we are teaching the parents because the parents can make the big impact. We are just little names and faces that nobody knows. So it's like the parents are the ones who have that relationship with the kids and can really make an impact. So we want to equip and empower the parents to have these conversations.
Ab
and that's really, I think, the missing link. So many times parents leave it up to the church community or to the schools, and they're kind of relieved, like, "Whew, I don't have to do this,"
Mhm.
Mhm.
but you really do. And so it's intimidating, and that's what we want to take away for parents, the intimidation of it. We want to give you sample conversations and give you scenarios where you can see yourself in that role and you can speak to your children and it's like, that was easy.
Right.
That wasn't hard. We have a beautiful story to tell, but we just need help and coaching in telling that story. And I really think that's what Megan is sharing all the time on Instagram, is that confidence. It's
Mhm.
not just the words, but it's the, oh, she made that sound so easy
Right.
um, factor of it. And so that's where I think Birds and Bees is different, because we're catching parents when their kids are young
Mhm.
and they're not looking into the eyes of a 14-year-old. They're looking into young eyes and they're not giving that much information
Right.
from moment to moment. Accumulated a lot of
Mhm.
information, but moment by moment, little things.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's dive right in. As parents, we have the instinct to protect our kids and their innocence, specifically around sex and their bodies. And let's be honest, without practice, that can be a really awkward conversation to talk about. But I love y'all's approach, that the best way to protect them is to start by just talking with them about it. So, can you expand on that a little bit and kind of give us some tips as like how you get into that first conversation?
Well, it depends. Do you have a question asker or a not question asker?
Okay.
If you have a question asker, you need to run a little bit ahead of them and be ready before they ask. And so, really, I would say the first steps is for you to know, where do you want these conversations to go? And that's giving yourself a message for your children. Where is the direction? What's the main thing I want my children to know about sex if they're growing up in my family? And we go into extensive conversations about that, both in our online course and in the discussion guide, so that you can really feel comfortable about where these conversations are going in your home. Um, and so you're ready for those. You look for conversations like of a child that's asking a question. So, how's that baby getting out of there? What would I say? You anticipate those questions and kind of think through how you might answer them. For the child that's not asking anything, they may be just as curious as your question asker, but they just can't quite formulate the questions. And so, if you want to have these conversations, you'll have to take the initiative.
Okay.
But a really simple way to take the initiative is to a- ask them this question: Sweetheart, have you ever wondered exactly how that baby gets out of there? Like, if you take a meal to a friend, or if you've just had a baby within your family or at school, you can say, have you ever wondered how the baby gets out? And chances are, yes. Or do you think you know how the baby gets out? And you'll get a really funny answer if you get that. But that way, they know you're a safe person to talk about these things with
Mhm.
them.
It's funny because my children are 4 and 2, and lately they have been going around with their baby dolls in their shirts. And it's so cute. They like play house and they walk around and the baby's in their shirt. I'm like, "Oh, is that your baby?" And they're just like, "Yes, my baby's in my
Mhm,
belly." Because my best friend is pregnant. We have several like people in their lives who are
mhm.
expecting. And so I'm just kind of watching and I feel like I'm going to learn something from you guys on like what's the next steps, what is appropriate for them. But I feel like even at sometimes as a mom, some of the things that they're saying, I'm like, "Oh, that's so cute." And then I'm like, "I don't know how to follow that up, with what's appropriate." So I think this is very timely and very common. So I'm excited that y'all are here.
And sometimes we say, like, with the story of birth is really a great place for parents to kind of dive in because, first of all, talking about how that baby gets out is 1,000 times easier than talking about how that baby gets in.
Right.
So it's a good place to kind of camp out for a while because also it helps you as a parent feel confident in these conversations. Like, for example, the word uterus is not a bad word,
Right.
And so sometimes we're like, "Mm," so in that scenario of like little girls playing with babies in their, t-shirts, whatever, a casual comment of like, did you know that that baby is actually not inside a mommy's tummy? It is inside a special place that God designed called the uterus. It's like,
Yeah.
and they might like, huh? And never remember that word again. But again, that's where it gives you kind of that relief of like, these are drip, drip, drip conversations that might stick, that might not. But what we're trying to do is kind of just empower parents to start using certain words and become the authority on this topic. And also let the kids know that like, this is something that mom and dad know a lot about.
Yeah.
Like we know a lot about this.
Right.
And they've probably never heard the word uterus before. Um, and sometimes we tease like if the word uterus is like really painful
Can't do
for
it.
you to get out, because some people are anatomically with their words, and some people are like, "Oh, I can't do this." But if uterus is difficult, you can say the word womb.
Womb.
It's softer. It's from the
So
Bible. It's
true.
one syllable.
Yeah.
Um,
So true.
but it's just a good way to kind of clear the air, and you don't have to like correct your girls. Like, no, that's not in the belly. It's in the uterus. Like, you don't have to. It's not a you know, something worth fighting about. It's more just worth like a, did you know that that's actually, it's only mommies have that. It's a special place called a uterus.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really taking the babies out of the digestive
Yeah.
system
Right.
and into the reproductive system. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Kind of in the same, like, area, but going into body parts, I even find myself with, like, talking about private parts. When should we begin this conversation with our kids around their private parts?
We love talking about private parts. This is something I feel like we talk about a lot because if you are a mom of young kids, which I am, private parts are around a lot. Our kids are naked in front of us a lot. So there's lots of opportunities to be talking about private parts. And so um, you typically find two different camps of people, those who are very medical and anatomically correct. And it's like, of course, we say penis, vagina. And you might even have some people say, oh, well, we say vulva. I mean, there are some people who are very medical and accurate. And then you have this other camp of people who are like, oh, I can't do that. And it's just like, I get those splotches on my chest when I start talking about these words and, ooh, it's like, I don't like those words. So we were trying to come together here and really encourage parents to use the anatomically correct words. We start with penis and vagina to kind of keep it simple. But really, the reason we're doing that is to, again, let them know that we want to be medical and matter of fact. We don't want words to be, or these body parts to be shameful or bad words. And we also don't want these body parts to be like super silly. And if we kind of use silly, willy, wingy, wingy words all the time, but everything else has a normal name like head, shoulders, knees, and toes, it's, well, why are those parts silly? And kids are going to be silly about these parts. That is just the way they are. So we're kind of enhancing that silliness. And on the other side, if we kind of only whisper or, oh, yep, that's your, if we kind of act like that all the time, it's kind of creates this embarrassment. Like, should I be embarrassed of this part?
Mhm.
Should I be ashamed? Is this a bad part? Is that a bad word? And so we really want to be medical and matter of fact. And then ultimately, the most important reason that we really encourage parents as young as 2 or 3, potty training is a great time to start introducing some of these words. And again, you're just introducing them. But these conversations can start young. And ultimately, the most important reason for them is for their safety. And if you speak to any sexual abuse experts, they will tell you that the number one thing that we as parents can do is to correctly label their body parts and clearly label them as private. And again, these are not conversations that are sit down and heavy and take your 3 and 5-year-old and sit them down on the bed and say, okay,
You must know.
I've got to talk to you about your penis. It is a private special part. I mean, that is so heavy and
Right.
so overwhelming. These are just little bathtub conversations. Oh, that's your penis. That's a private part. Nobody else can touch that. Okay, did you rinse out your shampoo? Oh, yep, that's your vagina, sweetheart. That's a private part. Let's put on our little panties as we're getting ready for bed. Nobody else can look at or touch our private parts. These are little conversations that we're having, and a little catchphrase we like to use is frequent and frank. We want these conversations to be frequent and frank conversations because ultimately, and under the abuse prevention category, I think what you're really trying to do is just set the tone of this is something we talk about in our home. This is nothing to be ashamed of. There are no secrets in this house.
This is a safe
This is a
place.
safe place. Like this is the clear line. We define private as nobody can look at, nobody can touch, nobody can take pictures of. And that these are things that we're talking about all the time. And again, not all the time. You don't have to be crazy about
Right.
it.
And it's changeable too.
Yeah,
Like if you feel comfortable in public using the word privates,
that's fine.
I mean, I think that's fine, just so long as at home and in their presence and in your presence, that is a comfortable word
Hmm.
for y'all. So it doesn't have to be 100% of the time. And also, just not warning, but letting your grandparents know or your other child providers know that these are the words we're using. We're comfortable with them, and that's
Hmm.
just let the other people who are taking care of them know if they say those words, that's not a bad word.
Don't get them in trouble.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And I too, a lot of people will ask, like, how do I get grandparents on board? Because they're looking at me like I have three heads when my 3-year-old says vagina. That's okay. But you always say, go back to safety. If you let them know that the reason behind this is safety, like we don't want them to think these are bad words or be embarrassed to talk to us about these things because of their safety, most grandparents can get on board. And you don't have to force the grandparents to use those words as well. They can use private parts or whatever.
Right.
I think as far as when to start these conversations, I think these conversations can start as young as 2 or 3. Now, again, those aren't heavy sit down conversations. These are just introducing these words.
Vocabulary.
Yeah, when you're changing clothes or changing diapers or, in the bubble bath, these are conversations that we talk about in our home.
Yeah. What about like adding some boundaries around private parts or like speaking to, you kind of mentioned, okay, these are private parts. Like nobody else touches this. Nobody takes pictures of this. Or is there any other like boundaries around that you would advise parents like that during this conversation is kind of good to bring up?
Just that if anyone ever does show you their private parts or or they ask to see yours, that's something that you need to come and let me know. And and then also I think the conversation a side conversation is about secrets that and we don't keep secrets.
Mhm.
Surprises are good. Surprises are something that you keep inside till it's the right time to let someone know. But while it's inside, you're excited about it. But a secret is someone that asks you to keep something inside and it's makes you sad. Or you can give some definition about secrets. We just don't keep secrets with mommy and daddy. You need to come and let us know.
I was just going to add one more thing as far as like practicality, as far as private parts and young kids. I think as parents, some easy rules to follow is or statements to say regularly is, oh, we keep our clothes on when we play with friends. And then also kind of have an open door policy with play dates. Because we do get so many messages from parents that are more or less freaking out of, oh my goodness, the neighbor was over and I found my 6-year-old and the 6-year-old neighbor in the backyard looking at each other's private parts.
Mhm.
What do I do? Is there abuse or whatever? And so everyone really panics. And so I think it's not necessarily a great situation, but it is age appropriate. There is age appropriate curiosity. And so that's why it's even more important as parents that we're using this language. So let's say you walk in the backyard and that scene's going on. Say, oh, guys, put your clothes on. Remember, we never look at somebody else's private parts. And so that's the line that we want to keep saying because you most likely will find yourself in a situation like that where the kids are, preschool playing doctor or they're just curious and kind of checking things out. So that things like that happen. And the problem is when they kind of go unchecked. And so as the parents, we want to have that language instilled in our home of, oh, guys, we always keep our clothes on when we're playing with our friends and just keeping those doors open.
Yeah, and sometimes the kids want to play with the door closed, and sometimes it's not your child, it's the other child. No, we want to close the door. And just reminding that my job here as the mom, kind of like the flight attendant, is for
Mhm.
your safety. And
Mhm.
so I can't keep you safe if I can't see you and hear you. So we're going to leave this door open. That's what we do at our house. And, just let them know that that's a
Yeah,
policy
I
at your
love
house.
that. Okay, so taking this a step further, you guys have a stat on your site that says the average age of a child first exposed to porn is 11, and that children are as likely to accidentally be exposed to porn online as they are to actively be searching for it. How do you have conversations around if they see something in a picture, a book, or on TV?
Well, again, we kind of want to start having these conversations when kids are young. And parents listening right now with young kids are probably thinking, yeah, right. I'm not going to talk to my young kids about porn. That sounds horrific. And it does sound horrific. But the reality at hand is we're raising our kids in a very sexualized culture, in a very technology entrenched world. And so these statistics actually make sense to us if we think about them. And so what we really want you to do is see this big picture. And really what it is just a reality of the world in which they're living in. This is a dangerous element of their world. And how can we break that down into age appropriate conversations to protect them? And really, we can do so in the same way that we talk about a hot stove in the kitchen. Oh, we got to be really careful around that. The oven's on, or crossing the street. That's a dangerous risk in their day to day life. But we talk about it all the time. Here's what we do: we look both ways before we cross the street. You never cross the street without a grown up. We're just teaching them how to be careful around something that exists in their life. And so for pornography, what we can do at a very young age is just start introducing this idea to them that we've got to be really careful around screens. We want to be really careful with what we see. Oh, you can watch the show for a little bit. Mommy's going to put the code into the iPad because we got to be really careful with what we see. And then this idea that there are some good pictures out there, but there are also some bad pictures. And so if you see a bad picture, you need to stop and come and tell mommy. And so what you're doing is kind of going ahead of these situations and giving them a plan and preparing them. And so if God forbid they see something, they know that's what my mom was telling me about. I'm going to go talk to her. And again, these are not. This is not a one and done sit down conversation
Or heavy,
or heavy.
necessarily, even though
You
it's a heavy topic.
exactly, and that is what we really want parents to see with these conversations about body parts. I mean, abuse and pornography exposure are very heavy topics. I don't have to tell
Right.
that to parents. They're very heavy. But the conversations we're having with our little kids are not heavy. We are trying to be very matter of fact. And so, hey, we got to be really careful with what we see. And helping to find that, well, what's a bad picture? A bad picture is something that makes you feel kind of icky inside, or maybe is too scary, or a picture of people's private parts. Remember, we never look at somebody else's private parts. And these are conversations that you're having often, reminding them of those boundaries before you go over to a friend's house, or maybe
Mhm.
before you get together with all the cousins. And maybe there's some older cousins around that, you know,
Have screens.
have screens. Like, oh, the 10-year-old's got an iPad for Christmas and we're 4. So we're going to be really careful got to be really careful around screens. And so what we're doing is just kind of, again, taking, like we kind of say sometimes, like, that's a very dark topic. And so what we're doing with these conversations is essentially turning on the lights. And it doesn't take the problem away, but it kind of helps take away some of the heaviness. Because what does happen in these horrific stories with kids is if there is exposure and they don't have any vocabulary or language or exit strategies, what happens often is they kind of take this shameful moment combined with curiosity, because we're all wired in a curious way of, what was that?
Mhm.
And it kind of just sinks into a dark shame and they don't say anything. And that is kind of where real problems can start. So we are essentially turning the lights on and saying, again, this is something we talk about and we got to be careful. And if you see something, come and talk to me. If you see something bad, you're not a bad person. And these
Yes.
little talking points that really kind of help bring lights to this conversation.
Okay, so who should be having these conversations, mom or dad? And also, like the importance of facial expressions while you're having these conversations.
Well, both,
Hmm.
actually. We want these conversations to be as natural as possible.
Mhm.
When you think about any other conversations you have in your home, you don't really overanalyze, now who's going to answer that?
Hmm.
And so both parents need to be prepared. Usually one parent is a little more comfortable than the other. But when they're young, when they're little, whoever gets it should be able to answer at least to some degree and with some degree of comfort. That's why thinking and talking ahead with your spouse so that you can both have a level of comfort with some of the early questions is a good idea. Some parents think only dads should talk to boys, only girls should talk to their moms. And I don't think that's necessary. I think you can both talk to both kids at whenever the topic comes up. But I think once they hit the preteen ages, there's some conversations that are more comfortable with moms and daughters and fathers and sons, and that's okay too. But moms still need to speak into their son's reality. They're someone that has a lot of wisdom about what it is to be um, a young man around a young woman, what all of that thinking and all of those things that they need to know about women and girls. Their mom needs to speak to that also. But when they're little, either of them can speak at any time. And so we just don't want this main awkwardness to be in the room when these topics come up. But the one thing too is that sometimes they ask a question, an older child asks a question in front of a younger sibling.
Mm.
And that's when there's sometimes a little bit of a panic. And so answer as if the younger child asked it. Answer to that 4-year-old level, even though you're the 8-year-old asked the question. Answer to the 4-year-old. And then later on, kind of circle back with the 8-year-old and say, you know what, you're in 3rd grade and you asked a really good question this morning, but your sister was in the room and she's just in preschool. So there's a little more information I want to give you. And because you're older and you can handle it, or, it's just something like that to
Right.
acknowledge they're older and they can know more information. But other than that, I think you just try to keep these conversations as normal as possible.
Mhm.
Yeah. What about facial expressions? Because sometimes I feel, where it's like, I don't, but I don't want them to see that I have this look of that's uncomfortable.
That's something we would encourage you to almost fake it till you make it.
Hmm.
And that's with practice. I think once you kind of get into these conversations, and that's where another reason it's so helpful to start when they're young, because when they're young, they may not necessarily be looking at you when you're answering the question. A phrase we always use is, "That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked." And we always joke that it works best when your face looks like this.
Yeah.
Because one of our overarching goals at Birds and Bees is to be that safe place for your kids to come to with questions. You want them to feel like, I can talk to my mom about anything. I can talk to my dad about anything. If I've got a question, I know who to go to. And so practice when they're younger and start asking about babies and where they come from and how that baby gets out. And I'm just so glad you're talking to me. Most of you podcast listeners won't be able to see our faces here, but we are looking happy and safe. That is how we look right now. And really keep that up and kind of practice and practice, because when they start getting to, older, middle school, whatever, and they start coming home with like slang terms or, crass definitions or whatever, and they're asking you about it, you want to that is, you know, wow. I am just glad you came to me. You
Mhm.
want to continue to affirm that they have come to the right place. And that again just takes practice. And so practice makes perfect. Fake it till you make it. You just kind of want to just remind yourself of the bigger picture. The end goal is to continually affirm and confirm that your child's come to the right place. And so your facial expressions really do matter.
Hmm.
We talk a lot about tone of
Mhm.
voice, should be kind of calm and upbeat and matter of fact. And that tone of voice is important. And those facial expressions should kind of match.
We talk about a pediatrician voice,
Hmm.
kind of that kind, knowledgeable, reassuring voice that you want to be in their head. But as that first phrase, "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you asked," with a pre-designated facial expression of a smile, just know those are going to be my two go-to
Hmm.
things. And then if you are someone that wants to incorporate your faith, one phrase that I love to start you know, the answer to any question is, "Well, sweetheart, by God's design, this is how a baby's made. By God's design, this is how a baby's born." So that he's incorporated into these answers, and it's
Right.
just a good place to start.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I love that. Okay. So let's get into some conversation about sex. Should we, as the parent, bring it up to our kids or should we wait until they start asking questions?
I think it just depends on ages and personalities.
Hmm.
I think some kids are going to ask a lot of questions, and you're going to kind of get to some of those basic foundational conversations sooner than later if you have like a baby brother or sister come in. And so those conversations might come up more naturally when your kids are, you know, 6, 7, 8 and asking a lot of questions. And then you might have some kids who aren't asking any questions, and those conversations might not have happened. And you're thinking, okay, well, we're getting close to 4th and
Mhm.
5th grade here. And I feel like we haven't had any of those questions. And so in that point, I would say, it's probably best to start guiding those conversations with that phrase Mary Flo mentioned earlier of, have you ever wondered? And kind of, again, establishing yourself as the authority. And so I think it just depends a lot on personalities and ages.
And one reason we talk to we're really addressing young children is because of the fact that even though you have maybe a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old, when that 6 or 7-year-old goes to school, they're sitting and they're a firstborn 6-year-old. They're sitting next to a 6-year-old who's the youngest of four, who has a 16-year-old brother who's has a lot of exposure to things that your child does not have. Think about that.
Mhm.
So you want to be the first impression. We want parents to have the power of that first impression. And so anticipate that, not just that your child isn't asking things, but what's their environment? How many older kids are their friends,
Mhm.
exposed to? So it's just a matter of having that radar out there. I think it's a good time. I'm going to start it. There's nothing wrong with you taking the first step.
Can you guys tell us about using the word seed instead of sperm?
Yes. So one component of birds and bees that we talk a lot about is seeds and eggs, and how those are great basic reproductive conversations and not necessarily human reproduction. We want our kids to kind of open their eyes to the big picture of reproduction in all things. And so we encourage parents to talk about seeds create new life with, planting little flower seeds, or the pumpkin seeds inside the pumpkin make new pumpkins. And so kind of creating those conversations, and same with eggs create new life. And so what we're doing here is laying a foundation for future conversations about human reproduction, which also involves seeds and eggs. Now, as the adults, we know that seeds actually mean sperm. And so some parents say, well, why don't you just start with the word sperm? And if you want to start with the word sperm, you can. It's not a bad thing to start with. It's just that it's very difficult to find other real world examples about sperm. There's not really, you don't plant some sperm in the backyard
Right.
and grow flowers. So it's a helpful place to start as far as building that foundation of an idea. And so we talk about seeds and how seeds create new life, like the little, what you're showing your kids with these conversations about seeds, and they can see seeds in lots of examples. In the kitchen, you're cutting open that apple and there's an apple seed inside that apple. That little seed creates new apples. It doesn't create oranges. That apple seed creates apples. And so we start with seed because it's a great word that they can kind of understand and connect their dots to other seeds in their life.
And it's sort of universal. Like that's just a universal
Mhm.
thing that deep inside of every living thing is part of what it takes to make the next living thing just like it. But you can also start identifying other names for seeds,
Mhm.
like an avocado has a pit or a peach has a pit. And, there are other names so that when you do explain conception, you can say the daddy has a seed and that seed is called the sperm. So you can slide right into sperm when you're talking about reproduction of humans, but letting them know that it works the same way as a seed.
No, I think that's really helpful because, I mean, even with my kids right now, they're really into gardening and
Mhm.
they're growing some little flowers in their class at school. And so they come
Aw.
home and are like, the flowers growing every day? It's growing a little bit more. So it's very applicable if that like were to be a conversation that we started to have, but they already understand like the seed is like helping something grow.
Mhm.
Yes.
And it makes sense for a 4-year-old and allows you to have easier conversations. But if you are thinking, well, I don't want to do that, I want to start with the word sperm, then you have every right to do so.
Hmm.
Again, what we really want to do at Birds and Bees is empower parents to take charge and be the authority on this topic. So if anything we say on this podcast or in our course or on our Instagram doesn't line up with what you believe, we really want encourage you to say, okay, well, what do I believe about this? What do I want my
Mhm.
kids to know about sex? I don't think I want to say it the way she said it, but what do I want to say to my kids? And to really kind of put the power back to the parents of, um, because this is such a personal topic. And what we talk about a lot is, okay, I might teach my kids this. This is what I believe about sex. Me and my husband want to share this information with our kids. Well, that might be different than what you across the street want to tell your kids. But big picture, what we really want is for parents to be talking to their kids about sex in age appropriate ways, regardless of their beliefs. And so that might sound a little bit different from every family, but we just really want to encourage parents to continue these conversations.
And to really think about what is that thing that we want to say. And
Hmm.
instead of saying, I I have to say what they said, that's not true.
Hmm.
Hmm.
This is not like just one size fits all kind of kind of conversation, you need to really think about, where do I want these conversations to go ultimately?
Mhm.
And that's just going to be different from family to family.
Yeah. So I know we've kind of talked about age appropriate, but would you say, like, if somebody's child hasn't brought it up to them yet and maybe they don't have any friends who have older siblings, so it's not just kind of potentially being brought up by them, when would that right time be? Or is there like okay, by the time they're in third grade, we should like have this conversation if they haven't started any of this yet?
It's just so hard to give it an age. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? It really is, because if if you go through these drip, drip, drip conversations, if you see yourself as filling the sponge and you're anticipating and looking for the opportunity to share this with them, then I wouldn't worry too much about, it's this age and I haven't done anything.
Okay.
I would assess, okay, where are we on the whole journey of these conversations? Do they know about their body parts? Do they know how a baby's born? Do they know the names of the parts that create a baby? Are we all the way up there but not there yet? And so if you are, as a parent, if you're thinking, I just feel like they should know, then go with your gut and say, you know what, sweetheart, you know so much about how babies are born, but you don't know exactly how babies are made. And I really want to be the one to tell you. So I'm just going to tell you. So we're just going to, we're going to, I want to visit with you about that. Have you ever wondered exactly how that baby got in there? And they may have wondered and they may have not. But if you feel like, they're going off to camp this year and I want them to know, I don't want them to, if you feel like we're about to hit summer and I'm not going to be with them all the time, or I'm not, I will be with them all the time, but they're going to be with older cousins or they're going to be in situations. And I just want to be assured that I told them.
And I
Then,
think, oh, sorry.
no, then go ahead.
I think too, kind of what Mary Flo was saying, if you sense this urgency a little bit as a parent, if you're listening today and thinking, well, shoot, I haven't said anything and we're starting middle school next year, or they're going to sleepaway camp or whatever. If you kind of feel that, well, I want them to know everything before that, to really kind of step back and give yourself maybe like a 6-month window. Because what we don't want is for parents to hear all this information and then think, oh my goodness, I haven't said a word when my kids were 3, 4, and 5. And now, next thing I know, we're going to middle school next year. Hey, sit down. We have a lot to catch up on. That's absolutely
That's
what we're not trying to do.
Don't hear that.
So if you're feeling late to the game or like feeling like you need to catch up real quick, give yourself a window maybe of 6 months or so to be like, okay, between now and the next school year starts, before they go off that middle school, or now between summer camp or whenever it is, kind of say, okay, I'm going to be really intentional to have some of these conversations, and kind of start by, seeds create new life, or deep inside every living
Mhm.
thing, whatever phrases you want. Have you ever wondered how a baby's born, and kind of start slowly building that up over time? Because again, what we don't want is, and sometimes we do this, we have live presentations we do where we basically share our entire Birds and Bees course in person. And so often parents will come up afterwards and be like, that was so great. I'm going to go home and wake up my child. I'm like, no, 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 no. don't do that. That's the opposite of what we want you to do. And so same thing, if you're sitting here and if any sort of urgency, I think some people want to know like 8 is too late or 10 is the magic number, or they just tell me what to do. That's what parents want to know.
Mhm.
And so we're not going to give you a number, because then you're going to put it down and forget everything else we said and focus on that number. So I would just say, if you sense that feeling of like, "Oh, I just really feel like they should know this before they go to fourth grade," or, "Oh, I really feel like they should know this before they go to fifth grade," or whatever it is for
Mhm.
you and your community and the school
Mhm.
divisions we have and neighbors and all that stuff, then decide, okay, we're going to move towards these conversations over the next 6 months, something like that.
Give yourself some time. That's
So,
the main thing, is make it a process, not just a one-time event.
yeah, I like that. What about, do you have any like specific tips on like how that conversation should go? Because I'm thinking in my head right now, like, you know, when my 4-year-old is a little bit older, if she were to ask me these questions, or if I were to feel like I need to have that conversation, I feel like all of a sudden I'm like, I, I don't know what I would say that is gonna like that she would understand without just being too blunt, but maybe that, I don't know. What are your kind of tips around like how a parent should have that? Like what tips they're sharing?
Well, I think you can first of all, think about their age, think about the words they already know, build on that. But you don't want to make it too long of a conversation.
Mhm.
You don't want to take that heavy book called Sex and just drop the whole thing on their head, right?
Right.
You know so much, but they don't need to know so much. You don't need to
Mhm.
download everything. And in your mind, you've got to get rid of the idea of the talk. We finally had the talk.
Mhm.
That's that one of the big things we want to do is just blow that out of the water. It's not effective. It's too much information at an awkward age and an awkward time. So that's not working for us. So what you want to do is just know this will be not be my last conversation with them about this. This is just my first. So maybe you just introduce the characters. Maybe you just open that big book and you say, what I want my child to know is that they were created by God, and then there's a husband and a wife, and a seed and an egg and a baby. So by God's design, a husband and a wife were made to fit together in a special way. When they fit together, the seed and the egg meet, and that's what starts the baby. End of
Very
sentence,
simple.
end of
Yes.
conversation. That's it's but that would be relating to the message that I want my child to have. And so it's your message combined with just the basic biology and almost in a mechanical way. Like we're not trying to explain anything that has to do with the pleasures that are involved with sexual intercourse or the dangers that could be a result of sexual intercourse. We don't want to get into sexually transmitted diseases, and we don't want to talk orgasm. So we're only
Keeping it
talking,
simple.
we're keeping just the tips would be basic biology plus your message.
Okay.
And just a reminder of like, that might be the first conversation you have, but it's not the last.
Mhm.
And so I can't tell you how many times parents have said, okay, I did it. I explained everything, the mechanics. Like, I felt like we did a good job. And then a year or two will go by and a child will come back and say, now how's the baby made? Like, you don't remember?
Didn't-
I almost died that day. And like,
Yeah.
I'll never forget
you
telling
don't
you.
remember? It's like, okay. So really just to kind of take a deep breath and realize we're going to talk about this a lot. This is not like a one time you explain it, they get it. Like, oh, thanks, mom. It's awesome. Okay.
I'm there.
We don't have to talk about it
Yeah.
again. Like you're going to talk about this often, and that's okay. And so I think what we have to do as parents too is we have to kind of remind ourselves and almost like state claim like sex is a good thing. And it's a privilege to share this with our kids. And the world has made it something that's disrespectful or confusing or degrading. And if we remain silent on the good story that we have to tell, we're essentially kind of waving a white flag and saying, oh, mommy's too uncomfortable with this. It's so awkward. I can't do this. Just Google it, and it's like, that's not, we can do better than that. And our kids deserve better than that. And so that's our hope really, is to just let parents know, hey, this is a good thing. We've got something we can share with our kids, and they can see that we're the experts on this topic. And they're going to see confusing things and hear different words or different messages or definitions of sex, but this is what we believe. And so we just really, that's kind of our takeaways. We want parents to know, like, I can do this. I can talk about this.
Just a quick story, but a couple of weeks ago, I got to do the birds and bees class at my daughter's church in North Carolina. And when she introduced me, it just was a little bit shocking, or it was really sweet. She said, everything that you're going to hear tonight, I know, but I have no idea when I learned it. So it would be like asking your child years from now, exactly when did you hear that you were supposed to put your napkin in your lap? You don't know when you learned it. You just automatically know this. Some of the things that they absorb and hear, your facial expression, your posture with how you're approaching this subject will be something that they'll just grow up with. If it's done in small pieces, age appropriate, and frank and frequent. So it's a process that you go through, but it's very hard to get the idea of the talk out of a parent's mind, that they don't just see that as a really hard thing that
Like,
they have to do and then
check.
check it off. I did it. We're good to go. That's not helpful.
Well, it also, I feel like this conversation just is giving me personally confidence to know that this is going to be like a privilege I get to have. This conversation is a privilege I get to have with my girls, So I think if you look at it through a different lens, instead
Mhm.
of this is going to be really hard someday, instead of like it's educating them, it's going to like help shape them into be like the women that they become, and taking that as like more of a privilege, that's just already switched like my mindset from when I asked the question just a little while ago.
Because you're not just educating your child, you're educating someone's future wife,
Mhm.
someone's future husband. How do you hope when they have this how do you hope they approach this? So you get the privilege of setting the table for that.
Yeah. No, that's a great way to look at it. While we're kind of on this topic, I also wanted to ask you guys a few questions just about periods and reproductive systems. Um, how and when do you broach this topic with our girls, and when should we bring this up to our boys?
Okay, periods. So again, with all topics under the birds and bees umbrella, periods is one that we also want to kind of break down into age appropriate conversations. Um, and just so when our kids are little, boys and girls, making sure they know that like periods or tampons or pads, whatever, is not like this taboo topic. So let's say your little 3 or 4-year-old boy finds a tampon in your bathroom drawer or in your purse, instead of overreacting and again, tone of voice, facial expression, saying, "Don't touch that, put that away, get out of here," whatever the
Mhm.
reaction is, kind of say, "Oh, thank you, that's mommy's, that's from when mommies have periods," or, "Oh, that's called a tampon, it helps when moms have periods." Again, you don't have to sit down with your 4-year-old and say, "Let me tell you about the uterine walls." Like, we don't have to dive into exactly what this is, but we can also engage in a way where they know this is not like a bad thing. Do we have to talk so openly about it where they think it's like this beautiful, amazing thing? No, they don't have to think that either. But again, the attitude, the takeaway that we want is our kids to see, well, it kind of is what it is. Periods are normal. And that's kind of what we want to help them realize is through these conversations and through the language we use in our home, let them see our goal is to normalize periods because periods are normal. And that's kind of the
Mhm.
hope for boys and girls. You know, obviously our girls as they get closer to puberty, that's gonna be more of an intentional conversation like, hey, your body is gonna be going through a lot of changes and this is kind of how periods work. And a lot of times there's confusion of like, well, where do I bleed out of and how much blood and am I going to be dying and like
Mhm.
all these questions. So obviously the conversations with girls will be a little bit more comprehensive, but I think we're doing our sons a disservice if we keep them in the dark about this.
Right.
And really our daughters a disservice if we keep our sons in the dark about this, and just
Mhm.
letting them know, hey, just like you're going to go through a lot of changes and your body's going to change and your voice and some hair and all these fun things. But girls go through changes too, and they have a period. And so just to let them know to be mindful. Um, and something I think is so important when talking about puberty and body changes is talking about empathy. I think that's so huge for boys and girls. Just like everyone's going through a lot of changes. Everyone's feeling a little misfit in their own bodies. Everyone's uncomfortable with what's happening. And so just be empathetic up to the other gender, to the same gender. Like it's just kind of a tough time.
And everyone
Mhm.
goes through it at different times, but they'll all go through it. But,
Mhm,
if you're the last one to go through this in your school, you feel like this will never happen. Or if
mhm,
you're the first, you feel like, wait a minute, no one else is going through
mhm.
this. So for them to know there's a whole wide range of ages where this happens.
And sometimes I think little girls can hear about periods and kind of be afraid,
Mhm.
of like, I don't want to do that, especially as they're getting a little bit closer to pre puberty years. But again, to normalize, you know, think of, name 10 women that you know of mommy's friends or your aunts or grandma's, right? Do you know that every single one of them had a period? Every single woman in this world has had a period. Does
Right.
that make you, does they look weird to you or different to you?
Hmm.
No, it happens to everybody. We're going to be okay, to kind of normalize it. We had some polls on our Instagram a while ago about puberty, and it was interesting. I think that was the resounding message from girls our age, of like looking back, I just wish my mom would have made it normal and not like this secret weird thing. Or the flip side, I wish my mom just would have made it normal and not like celebrated it and thrown a party for me. I think that was like the
Yes.
resounding message of like, I just wish it was like normal and they just gave me the information
Hmm.
instead of the two camps of nothing or um,
Have a
coming out
party.
woman
Yeah.
party.
It's so funny. I remember when I started my period, I was at school and my mom was a teacher at the school. So I like went up to my teacher and I was like, I think I've started my period. I need to go talk to my mom. And she was in the class down the hall. So I went down and like knocked on her door and I was like,
Hmm.
trying not to cry. And I'm like, I think I started my period.
That's what happened.
And she just like gets this look in her eyes and she's like, okay, just a second. Like, gets a teacher to watch her class and she takes me into the teacher's bathroom and she just is like, and like gives me a hug and is like, you're just becoming a woman. And I was like, I'm hurting and bleeding.
Too much, too much.
But it was like, I remember her then being like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Like, here's the
Mhm.
plan. Like, this is what
That
we're
was
going to
very
do
balanced. I think
immediately.
she did a good job. Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't a crazy party, but for
Yeah.
whatever reason, she was like excited for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just so funny. And then kind of on that same kind of thing. So my girls are little right now, and you can't go to the bathroom without having somebody tagging along with you. And so if I'm on my period, I'll change my tampon, and they're like, "What are you pulling out of your butt?" And I'm like, trying not to laugh. And I'm like, well, this is a tampon, and mommy's on my period. And they're like, a tampon. Wow. And their eyes are just like, what is happening? And they would like run out and be like, Daddy, mommy put a tampon out of her butt. I'm like,
Okay.
okay.
Mm.
But at least they will know
No,
as
it's
like
normal.
yeah, exactly. It just is what it is. But it
Mhm.
always cracks me up whenever they follow me in the bathroom and I'm like, okay, girls, like, here we go.
Gotta do what I gotta do.
Exactly.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, I know we talked a little bit earlier about saying like the babies don't grow in our tummies, but they grow in our uterus. And just in conversation with periods and teaching our kids about periods, can you kind of tell us a little bit more about like how you can relate the uterus in there as what, like while you're having these reproductive talks?
Well, sometimes they're curious, like, where does this blood come from?
Hmm.
And why are you bleeding? And all of that. And so even though you don't have to go into extensive conversations about the uterine wall, you can say that, or some form of this, that every month or so, the the lining of the uterus forms what would be needed for a baby if a baby were being created in there, all the nutrients and everything. And that substance has a lot of blood in it, but it can't stay there forever. It has to be fresh each month. And so the lining of the uterine wall um, kind of comes out. It what would be the right word? Now I'm losing
I
a
would
word
say
here.
kind of like it's like your body's way of cleaning out the uterus.
Hmm.
Right. Yes. So you don't have to go through the whole egg lands there, then it comes out or any of that. But I just think it comes out and it comes out the uterus. It's not out of another opening down there. It's out of the uterus. And I can either sit someplace for about 4 or 5 days and let it come out. Or if I need, but I need to run around, wear my clothes to protect my clothes. I use the tampon or a pad so that I can keep functioning in my daily life. So it is going to come out. When it comes out, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable. You can tell them that, but it's nothing overwhelming. And
Hmm.
so this product helps me keep up with my regular life while that's happening.
I like how you guys are teaching us how to just start these conversations so early by I can just visualize in my head how this will work. Relating back, oh, the baby's actually not in your belly, it's in your uterus. And then later, when we're talking about reproductive and period, we can be like, remember how mommy always told you like the baby was in the uterus? Like, this is how the uterus works and this is what happens. Like, it feels like we've got some building blocks
Mhm.
to just keeping these conversations going, which I think is really important and a great way to like be the person having the conversation with your kids.
You have got it. That is
Yes.
That's it.
exactly the goal.
Yay.
That's what we're going for. And if you're using wingy wangy words or you're being evasive or it's in the tummy, well, I thought that's where the cheeseburgers go. Or,
Hmm.
we're just not giving them good foundations. So then the conversations can't build.
Mhm.
But you got it. That's exactly what we want parents to be able to do.
Well, good. Okay. In closing, I have one last question. What is one of the funniest questions or statements that a follower has sent in that their kid has said?
My gosh. It's funny. We get a lot of funny questions or
Things that kids say the
kid
darndest
we
things.
do have
Yeah.
a little
Hmm.
segment we do on Birds and Bees Instagram a lot, which is submitting your kids say the darndest thing stories. And we kind of do it a couple times a month and we get the
Mhm.
funniest stories because I do feel like we need to have like a little warning, asterisk or whatever, like if you start using these words, like if you start having these conversations, you will have funny stories. Like
Right.
that is just the way it is. Um, the last week, somebody shared this story, which was so funny. They were explaining how their breasts make food for the baby, explaining that to like their 4-year-old. And so then the 4-year-old jumps on the mom's lap, squeezes her boobs together, and says, "Make me a sandwich." I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like, it just made me laugh
Oh,
out loud.
well,
Of
you
like,
can see that child
you can
doing
see
that.
it, and you can see the logic there of like, well, these make food, and I'd like a sandwich. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my gosh. That was submitted last week, and
Yeah.
that one like actually made me laugh out loud, which was funny.
That's hilarious. I could definitely see that happening too.
And again, I mean, you can either be completely mortified and just be like, ah, stop that, or
Mhm.
lean into that conversation. Like, actually, sweetheart, the mommy's breasts only make milk. That's what, we're mammals like
Mhm.
other
Mhm.
animals are. And we make milk for our babies. But if you would like a sandwich, we'll go to the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yes.
You
Well, this conversation has been so amazing. I think this episode has been so impactful. I can't wait for our listeners to listen to this. I know that you guys are paving the way for us to have these conversations appropriately, and just everything that you're teaching us here, I think is going to be really awesome. Do you mind sharing where our listeners can find you? And I know you guys have a course. If there's anything you want to mention about the course, we would love to hear that.
Yes. Our most comprehensive resource is the online course, and that's on our website, birds-bees.com. And we'd love to give you guys a discount code if you guys are cool with that.
Awesome. Yeah, we
Um,
would love that.
And that is really like I was just saying, it's our most comprehensive resource. It covers everything you need from preschool to preteen, and you can watch it as many times as you want. It does not expire. And then if you want more little tidbits, talking tips, and that they like, you can find us on Instagram, birds_bees. And we just share lots of talking tips. We have a great community on Instagram that really shares their own stories. And I think it's always helpful to hear other parents and kind of hear like, hey, I did this and it was great.
Right.
Or funny stories like that. So at their online course and then our Instagram are some really great resources if you want more birds and bees.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This conversation has been amazing. I just truly appreciate you joining us today on Life with Loverly.